In this video, we'll try to go over some functional interfaces already defined in Java 1.8. Java util.function package has a lot of functional interfaces defined. Now, these interfaces can be categorized into 4 categories: consumer, function, predicate, and supplier. We'll go over these interfaces one by one. Now, first, let's talk about consumer. Let's say I try to create an object for this consumer interface. If we go into the consumer into the source course, we'll be able to see that consumer is an interface. It is a functional interface. Therefore, it has only one abstract method. So to create an instance for this consumer, we'll have to provide the implementation for this accept method. Now for consumer, this method takes a parameter and it returns nothing. It returns void. And also we'll have to make sure to provide the generic type for this consumer instance. So let's say we're going to work with string. So I will specify string, and to create instance using the Lambda expression, we'll say we have already seen the consumer, the accept method takes a parameter. So since we have specified string, so it is going to be string because we have specified t to be string, right? So let's say string s, and the implementation would be s out s. So now let's try to call this function, method consumer.accept. That's the name of the method, right? Let's provide dicto, and if you run it, it will be printing out dicto. Now, whenever you find yourself in a situation where you don't know the name of the method that you're supposed to call, just head over to the functional interface and try to find out the abstract method. Now let's have a look at the supplier. So supplier, let's say supplier, and let's go into the interface. It is a functional interface and it has an abstract method which is get. So a supplier takes nothing as a parameter and returns something. Okay, so let's say this time we are going to work with string. So supplier is equal to, this method doesn't take anything and it will return simply, let's say, something. Now let's try to use it. So I'll say supplier.get, that is the name of the abstract method, and if we run it, we get something in the console. Now let's have a look at the predicate. So predicate, if we go into predicate is a functional interface. It has a method named test. It takes something as a parameter and it returns a boolean. So essentially we can use predicate to, let's say, mostly what we use predicate for is pass something in and test out if it has some properties or it abides by some rule. If it does, then we return true. If doesn't, then we return false. So let's try to create an instance for this predicate. So let's say we're going to work with string, and let's say what this predicate does, it takes a string as a parameter. So let's say s, and verifies if the length of the string is greater than 5. So s.length is greater than 5. Now to use this predicate, let's say what I can do is predicate dot test. Let's say the string I'm providing has a length of 4, and if I run this, it should return false. And let's say the length is now 7, and if I run this time, we should get true. So predicate takes something as a parameter and returns a boolean. We use predicate for filtering. We'll see this in a moment. Now let's have a look at this function. So function, if you go into this function, it is a functional interface. It has a method named apply. It takes something as a parameter and returns something. Now we use this function for mapping. Now if you look closely at this generic, the first one that we are using, t, is the object type or the parameter type, t, and the second one that we are using, it stands for the return type. Okay, now let's try to create an instance for this function. Now in our case, let's say this function takes a string as a parameter and returns an int. Now let's say this function will take a string as a parameter and return the length for that string. So it takes a let's say string s, and it will just return s.length, the length of the string. So if I just try to use it, so I'll say function dot apply, let's say 1 to 3, the length is 3. And if we run this, we can see that the length is indeed 3. Now, so far we have seen 4 functional interfaces. So the first one would be consumer. A consumer takes something and returns nothing. A supplier takes nothing but returns something. A predicate takes something and returns a boolean, and a function takes something and returns something. Now, where are these functional interfaces used? So let's say I have a list of strings, and what I want to do is remove some elements from this list based on some conditions. And for that, I'll be using list dot remove if. Now, if I go into this method signature, you'll be able to see that it takes a parameter of type predicate. So we'll have to provide a predicate to this remove if method. So let's say we create a predicate here. So predicate, and we're going to deal with strings, right? So I'll specify string is equal to, now a predicate takes something as a parameter and it returns a boolean, right? So this time it will take a string, and let's say it will return true only if a string starts with letter A. So s dot starts with, let's say, A. Now I'll pass this predicate into this method predicate, and if I print this list, I should get this output. So what I'm doing here is creating a predicate. This predicate returns true only if a string starts with the letter A, and then I'm passing this predicate to the remove if method. So what I'm saying is that remove all the elements in this list which starts with the letter A. Hence, these two elements A that starts with A are removed from this list. Now we can simply just copy this portion and put it here instead of predicate and remove the previous line. It still is going to work just fine. We can also remove these brackets here and it is still going to work fine. Now we can see that using these lambda expressions, we can not only pass the primitive types and objects in our methods. Now a method can also take a behavior as a parameter. So let's say now I want to remove all the strings which has a length greater than 4. So what I would do is simply s dot length is greater than 4, and if the list looks like this, if I run it, so I just only have the first element. Now if you look closely in this remove if method, it takes a predicate, and from the definition of predicate previously we know that predicate is a functional interface and it has a method named test, right? And if you go back into the remove if method, the name of the predicate that it takes is filter, and somewhere inside the code it is using filter dot test method. We know predicate is a functional interface and it has a method called test, right? And where is the implementation for this method coming from? It is coming from right here. Now the list interface also has another method which is for each, and let's have a look at this for each method now. So this for each method takes a consumer as a parameter, and from our previous knowledge of consumer we know a consumer takes something and it returns nothing, right? Now let's say for each of these strings in this list I want to print their length. So let's create a consumer and we'll be working on a string. Consumer is equal to, it takes a string as parameter, and I'll be just printing out the length of the string. So let's pass in consumer, and if I run this, it should print out the length. So now we don't actually need this need this whole declaration. You can just inline this and remove this one. I also don't need this brackets. If we run this, it still is going to work. Let's have a look at an use case for the interface function. For that, I will create another class. So let's name it student. Now a student has, let's say, private string name and a private int id. So let's create a constructor and then create getter and setters for these two properties. And I also will add toString method for these two properties. And now I'll create a list of students. So list is equal to new array list. Arrays dot as list. So new student, the first one, let's say equal 10. New student, let's say 20, and let's name it Nabil. Okay, so from this list, what I want to do is create another list. So this list has students in it, but I want to create another list which has only the name of the students. Now, let me just put the type as student for this list. So let's say I want another list which only has the names of the students in this list. So let's say names is equal to, what I can do is use the stream API. So I'll just say list dot stream, and from this stream API I'll be using the map function. Okay. Now if I go into this map function, you'll be able to see this map function takes a function as a parameter. And what does a function do? A function takes something as a parameter and returns something. So we'll have to make a function that takes user as a parameter and then returns their names and then provide that function to this map method. So first let's create this function. It will take a student as a parameter and then return a string. The function is equal to, let me just put a semicolon there. So function is equal to, so it will take a student and then return their name, right? Now I'll pass this function to this map method, right? So function. Now what I need to do is this map, if we look in this map API, this map method, it returns a stream of objects. So in this case, it returns a stream of students. We need to convert that to a list, right? So I'll just say collect collectors dot to list. So now let's print out the names. So names, and if we run this, then we end up getting a list which only has the names of the students. And now if we go back to this map method and go to its implementation, then we can see that it takes a function as a parameter named mapper, and it is using this mapper here. So it is invoking the mapper.apply method. So what did we know about function? What do we know about function? We know function is a functional interface and it has a method named apply. Why did we provide the implementation for this method? Here in this function, right? Now what we can do is just copy this part here and put it there and remove the previous lines, and still it is going to work just fine.